recognize this beautiful constellation. It's Orion, my favorite. I see him as a warrior and a protector. Betelgeuse is the star in his right shoulder, one of the brightest stars in the sky, but it's destined to become a supernova. Now that might look beautiful and might sound beautiful, but a supernova is a star in crisis. It starts to fade a little bit, and then its fuel is exhausted, its energy is depleted, and then gravity kicks in. Do any of the women about my age in the audience feel that? Does it sound like menopause to you? Me too. But you know, you guys, I know you've also been through crises in your lives that are exhausting and make you feel depleted. Everybody has. When the gravity takes over the star, it crushes it and things look pretty bad. But the good news is, after the star implodes, it explodes into the brightest that it's ever been. And the coolest thing about supernova is that when it explodes, it releases life-giving elements that are in our periodic table. Things that make up the earth, things that make up animals, things that make up humans, things like oxygen that we breathe, calcium in our bones, iron in our blood, and other elements. You know, the Department of Energy and NASA both agree that we really are made of stardust. I guess that kind of makes us descendants of the stars. So a supernova reminds us that even when we go through a crisis, that depletion of energy, the running out of fuel, and gravity trying to pull you down, you can shine brighter than ever. Another very cool thing about Orion is there's a star in his sword. The belt is 3 stars across, the sword is 3 stars down. And the middle star on that sword is not a star at all. It's a collection of molecular gases that they call the Great Nebula. That's a birthplace of stars. Tiny little bits of potentiality. Baby stars. And what does that mean to you? It means that whenever you enter a crisis-fueled explosion, you too can emit and share life-giving elements from within you. Hope, knowledge, inspiration. And you too can give birth to new stars. You know, I look up at Orion and I feel inspired to know that I can become a supernova too. And you know, Orion can be seen anywhere in the world. One of the constellations that's just present everywhere. And I have been to some dark corners of the world. And when I go to those dark corners of the world, I hear awful stories about terrible things. You know, in my 30 years as a therapist and a coach, I was also privileged to be an advisor and a consultant to World Hope International and on the board of World Resources Group. And so they send me to places like this to listen to these kinds of stories. Stories about rape and murder. Stories about hunger and poverty and AIDS and diseases. Stories about young girls getting pregnant way too early. And stories about mothers feeling compelled to sell their older children so their younger children can eat. when I went to Sierra Leone, I had the privilege of talking to child soldiers. Now, when I go to these countries and I explain to them that they can overcome, that they can become supernovas too, I find Orion there, always being comforting in his familiar presence. One of those child soldiers told me about the awful things he was forced to do during the war in Sierra Leone. Unspeakable things. Things like raping his own mother. Things like burning a building where his other family members were trapped. Annihilating whole villages. And now that the war is over, he tells me how he was abducted. He was on his way to school one morning, 11 years old, confronted by the rebel army. And they gave him drugs, they handed him a weapon, and the way they forced him to do these atrocities is by threatening him with his own life. So they had no choice. Now, of course, his family doesn't want to see him. He can't face his mother, and his whole village excludes him. So what do? We rehabilitate him. And it's a big job. And it takes intense counseling. It takes vocational training. It takes sometimes years. And yet this young man received that counseling. They trained him to be an electrician, and he renewed his sense of pride, his sense of self. And he decided he could shine brighter once again and live a productive life. In Cambodia, similar story. Orion was there when I was in Cambodia, a place where I knew no one, and we worked with trafficking victims that had been rescued. In early 2000s, about 2004, there was a big raid on the brothels outside of Phnom Penh. We rescued many young women, some younger than 12 years old, who had been trapped in a life of sexual slavery. They too needed intense counseling. They too needed rehabilitation. They too learned new vocations. They learned to sew. They learned to do hair. They learned to do things that created beauty. And in doing all this rehabilitation, they found their sense of purpose once again. They began to heal once again. They could choose once again to shine brighter than they ever had. And then in Honduras, a country of deep, deep poverty, parents can't even let their kids go to school because they're needed in the fields to pick beans so that the family can eat. So when we come in, what we do is we provide after-school counseling, after-school tutoring. They're even given now, I think they're giving them water filtration systems for their families. They give them food, they give them health care, and the kids can then go to school. And these kids, well, we've been there 20, 25 years. And some of those kids, we watch them grow up. And they grow up and they go to college and they learn new stuff and they come back and they mentor the young kids again, essentially giving birth to new stars. And the parents are happy too because they no longer have to keep their kids out of school. Now, whether you make this a physical connection or a kind of a metaphorical connection, either way, I believe that people who experience a crisis in their lives can choose to shine brighter than any supernova. These people, sometimes things happen to us and we allow people to sideline us, to make us feel like we don't belong, to make us feel like we're damaged, to make us feel like we're too old, too lost, too done. But we're not. You won't find a star sitting on the couch feeling sorry for itself. A star is created to shine. You are a star. You're a descendant of the stars. And Orion can inspire you to look up there and say, I too can be a supernova. You know, my dream is creating a worldwide constellation of supernovas. Supernovas that explode all over the place, that release their life-giving elements to the world. People like me, people like you, we're called to change the world. You know, and every day I can walk out of my house, my front yard, look up and see Orion, reminding me, you can too, reminding you that you are called to be a supernova. You are called to explode all your beauty and life-giving elements to give birth to new stars. And now it's your turn. What will you do to choose to become a supernova? What will you do? How will you give birth to new stars? The world needs what you have to give.